Welcome back, everyone. This is our final chapter of the series, bringing you to the last step of design, playtesting.
Playtesting comes in three varieties: playtesting by yourself, playtesting with friends, and playtesting with strangers. Generally, you move along this scale until you're satisfied the game is in a good state.
In today's video, we're going to cover both advice on how to get started with playtesting, as well as the principles that drive this process.
Also, stay tuned to hear about how the Gwinnett County Public Library Learning Labs can assist you with your game design journey and prototype revisions.
We're at the fourth step on our chart, playtesting. At this point, you should have a prototype which can be used to represent the game. You've probably already tested individual systems and possibly even played a few turns to ensure they work. You should also have your rules written out, even if they're not neatly organized yet. Now, the time has come to test the entirety of the game.
Like we mentioned before, usually playtesting takes the form of playing by yourself, playing with friends, and then playing with strangers. Another progression that often fits is solo playtesting, which is testing the game personally, guided playtesting, which is you recruit players, usually from friends, to aid you in the testing process. This is where you see if the game makes sense to others, even if the instruction manual isn't entirely complete. And then last is blind playtesting. This is usually done with strangers or possibly a different group of friends, where the playtesters follow the written rules rather than having you explain it to them.
Do you remember in the prototyping video, we discussed testing systems individually and then trying a round of play, following the rules exactly? That's what you want to try and do again, only on a larger scale. You know how the game is supposed to be set up, but what do the rules say to do? Follow them and see if they lead to the correct setup. If not, make a note of what was wrong and then set it up correctly. This will be the basic pattern you follow for your first playtest. Consult rules, follow them, and then assess. This will make the first playtest much longer than a typical game. You don't have to play until a game is complete, but try to do several rounds in order to get an idea for how systems respond to later turns. When you assess, make notes, but don't try to perfect the rules right then and there. I advise not to stop the test unless the game completely falls apart. If you know you meant something else with the rules, note it to be corrected, then keep on going.
So the biggest issue you're likely to face at the start is how to manage a 2 or possibly even higher player game as only a single person. There are a couple ways to do this, but be prepared to play your game a lot as a solo activity. So set up stations for the number of players your game is targeting, then move around the table, making actions for each station in turn. For your first test, it may be easier to play each station similarly to each other as you test the broader systems and general flow of the game. Iterate on rules as appropriate upon encountering issues, and then playtest it again.
If the game appears to work well, it's time to start testing the game's limits. To do this, you'll want to deviate from standard playing and start utilizing different strategies. At this point, you should begin to play your different stations in different ways. If you have a high player count, it can be helpful to leave one station in the same pattern as before. You can use this as the control group, but begin to push at different systems with your other stations. You can try playtest profiles as a mean to accomplish this. Essentially, you want to see if there are other ways to victory or if the game comes apart under different play patterns than you originally anticipated. We'll talk more about playstyle profiles in the exercise included at the end of this video.
So once you start playtesting with friends and strangers, there are a few ground rules to keep in mind. As a designer, you want to minimize interference. Ideally, players should be able to play the game without your input using the provided rules. Seeing how they interpret the rules is important information in its own right. However, while you're doing guided playtests, you can still step in if their interpretation will totally break the flow of the game. Make a note of their confusion and correct the rules after the game. Players' interpretation may vary from yours. This means you'll have to decide if revisions or clarifications are in order. Always take notes as you observe. If possible, and with your playtester's permission, recording the session can also be very helpful. If you encounter a critical error that will need major revision, you should choose to end the playtest session until that revision is possible. If possible, Watch to see how engaged the players are and if they seem to encounter any problems. When it comes to getting feedback, be receptive, not defensive. Good questions to ask are, can you tell me one thing you liked and one thing you didn't? By giving players a chance to tell you a positive along with the negative, they're more likely to voice trouble spots, especially important when testing with friends. Another question you can ask would be, how long did it feel like you were playing? You compare this to the actual time spent. If it's shorter than the actual time, that usually means they're having fun. Additionally, you can ask, what was your strategy? This is a good way to see if players understand the goals of the game and see ways to reach that target. Always remember though, it is your game. You don't have to incorporate any offered solutions. What you're looking for are trouble spots that you need to address.
Playtesters should strive to play the game to win as best you know how. Even finding overpowered strategies and gameplay loopholes provides useful feedback. Being passive, disruptive, or uncommitted does not. Be honest but constructive in your feedback. Try to detail the issues that you've encountered. You may have a fix in mind, but communicating what area was frustrating to you is the most valuable information you can provide the designer. Here are 6 tips to help you get honest feedback in your playtest. 1, get good at taking feedback. 2, outline expectations. 3, playtest with strangers and other designers. 4, ask specific questions after the session. 5, observe. And 6, don't be afraid of negative criticism.
As you continue to playtest, your physical prototype components will likely go through 3 main types of revisions. Updates. These are mechanical and rule updates that are changed playtest to playtest. Sometimes these may be large changes, and sometimes they may be tiny incremental changes. While it is best to work small changes at a time, sometimes big changes to the way your game works or including an awesome idea you had can't be helped. However, even if you're working on a big change, if it can be implemented in smaller parts of the whole, this can be helpful, as it will let you know if you're potentially going in the wrong direction before you're stuck or too sold on an idea, only to realize it needs even more big changes later down the road. Corrections. These are any type of correction that needs to be made. These may be mechanical or thematic in nature, or maybe more simplistic, such as fixing a grammatical error or rewriting a rule to be more accurate or inclusive. Visual changes. You may find that there are easier ways to denote or signal the information needed to play your game. As mentioned in our last video, information can often be portrayed more efficiently using methods such as keywords, icons, symbols, or color coding. The way your prototype looks will likely change playtest to playtest, as you either decide to change up the layout of items like cards or other objects, choose to portray information differently, or make changes in the finer details of your thematic elements. You should still strive to keep a balance between how many details and types of information your game needs in order to be played, and the different ways you can choose to display that information. Try not to jump too far at one time.
So when you feel that you're ready to move to the next step visually for your prototype, our learning labs can help you with a number of game design related elements. Keep in mind that until you finish the implementation stage, you will likely continue to go through many prototype changes even after working through several polishing steps. In the learning labs, you have access to design software such as Adobe Illustrator, Adobe Photoshop, and InDesign to help you design cards and boards and other game elements. Plus, we have fabrication tools such as 3D printing, laser cutting, and CNC technology that is available to help you create workable 3D prototypes for physical game parts such as weebles, tokens, counters, figures, and other elements. Of course, the library also has a large number of other resources at your disposal, especially when it comes to researching your theme to help make it more credible, such as books, online digital tools, and databases. If you'd like to know more about a specific resource previously mentioned, you can find more information on the Learning Labs section of our website. On this page, you can book an appointment. Additionally, if you prefer to have one-to-one assistance to help you get started, you can find a book a librarian form on our website as well. For this week's exercise, we want you to try and do a complete run-through of your game by yourself using multiple approaches. To accomplish this, you'll utilize some of the playstyle profiles brought together by a blog post on 3D Total Games.
Set up stations for the number of players your game is targeting. Put out a piece of paper at each spot and write a profile on each one to help you keep track of which is which. Balanced. This is your default station or your control group where you approach the game without slants toward any extremes. Hare. The hare tries to win as fast as possible. They take risks and rarely strategize in the long term, instead focusing on immediate gains. Obsessive. The obsessive focuses on a single aspect of the game and pursues it as much as possible. Worrier. The worrier focuses on avoiding negative consequences more than making gains. If you need more profiles than this for your player count, be sure to check out the blog post, Playstyle Profiles on 3D Total Games, also linked in our Google Classroom.
Once you have the station set up, play around. As you move to each station, take note of the profile you've assigned to it and play accordingly. Remember, the goal of these profiles isn't to make your playtest a close competitive match. The goal is to stress test your game in ways you may not have anticipated. Theoretically, among these profiles, the balanced approach should win the game the majority of the time. What you may see, however, is that these other playstyles cause problems you didn't anticipate. An obsessive pursuing something aggressively may cause shortages for other players, or a warrior's low-risk approach may slow the game down for other players as well. Then try other playtest profiles, either from these listed or from the blog. How do different approaches impact your game?
Take notes on how the game went. Did you discover any issues? One method to help you figure out the good, the bad, and the promising of your current game version is to write a rosebud thorn. Try writing your rosebud thorn now. So to give you an update on where we're at in our playtesting, with Galactic Auctioneer, we have undergone some significant changes since our last update. We playtested the game with both of us playing and several issues popped up. One of the biggest things we found was that having our numbers range from 1 to 10 made the idea of the lowest beating the highest a little strange thematically. It also meant that we had a lot of weak cards on the mechanical side. To that end, we decided to adjust our numbers. For our first shift, we cut it down to half, using 1 to 5 as our scale instead. This also meant that we needed to adjust a lot of our action cards, and our winning condition of all cards of one type now seemed too easy, so we set it to all cards of 2 categories instead. This additionally meant we needed to add more categories in order to keep options open for the players. Lastly, we found that action cards causing players to regain their discard pile kept the leading player ahead, which was the opposite of the intention, so we dropped that rule. We may revisit a tweaked version down the line, but it was definitely a big problem in our first playtest.
Wow, Stephen, that's a lot of changes. What's the big takeaway here?
Well, the main thing you should take from this is how much a playtest can change your game. Even small changes can have cascading effects. So since we're working remotely again, we've shifted to a digital format to test our new version of the prototype, dubbed 1.1. I definitely encourage you all to be unafraid to make changes to your game, but always keep the old versions around. We may find that 1.1's changes had consequences we didn't foresee, and having our first set of rules available will be useful for comparing results.
So if you've made it this far in the board game workshop, then you should have the beginning of a playable game that you can play with your friends and family. Great work. Of course, the more you playtest and the more you iterate, the better and more fun it will be. If this was your first game, don't hesitate to start working on other games you may have ideas for as well. As mentioned, the more games you make, the more likely you'll make an amazing one. Once you're happy with your game, the next part of the process would be to start thinking about the implementation stages of the game development. Remember that the Learning Labs are available to help you make progress in your game creation process And you can reserve time with a Learning Lab specialist or book an appointment on our website.
We hope that you've learned a lot and have made progress in your game design. Thank you for joining us. Have fun and keep on gaming.
Well, that's a wrap, Stephen.
And cut.